Welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo from The Athletic, joined in person. We're in the same place. It's very rare that this happens. Joined by Bruce Feldman, my colleague from The Athletic. Noah Stewart Mandel. He is...
Apparently this lavish oceanfront room that you got, Stu thought it was beneath.
Wasn't enough. Wasn't enough. Yeah,
Stu needed better.
I could give you guys a little view of the water here. We have a very nice setup here. We are at the national championship game to be played Monday night between Indiana and Miami. So we are in Miami. Bruce was at Media Day earlier today. I got in a little late. I had some other things to do this week, so I got in a little late. We will touch on Media Day. We will reapproach the national championship game a little bit. I didn't get a chance to give my thoughts on it, though I gave a prediction that I might be backing off on. But first, we want to start with really the big news of the last 24 hours or so, and that is Duke quarterback Darian Mensah jumping into the portal, or at least announcing he was going to jump in the portal. Not really sure if he's actually going to have his name in the portal, but he's looking to transfer despite having signed a 2-year contract. Remember, he was one of the big moves from in the portal last offseason. He left Tulane, went to Duke. Duke made a huge splash, spending, we think maybe around $4 million. At
least 3.
At least 3. Signed a 2-year contract. He said he was staying at Duke another year. The last day of the portal being open, a few hours really before it closed, he says he's leaving Duke and heading, I guess we'll find out, though we have some suspicions as to where. You've done a lot more reporting than I did on this, Bruce. I did a little bit. And the main thing that I found out is it doesn't look like there's a buyout on Mensah's contract. There is some question from the Duke side whether he can leave and have another school pay him for his NIL rights, right? Because these contracts are basically structured as NIL contracts. And I think their position is like, no, we still own your NIL rights. So maybe how do you get paid? It's a little complicated. Might take some lawyers to figure it out. But what do we know, Bruce?
So I think there's a couple of pieces of this. First of all, I think we can talk about the Mensah fit, if he's in fact the third big NIL quarterback that Miami has landed. First, obviously Cam Ward, then Carson Beck, and now if it's Mensah, we can talk about the fit of that. The one thing I think you and I were talking a little offline about, at the beginning of this felt a lot like the Damon Williams case. Now, Damon Williams had just signed like 4 days earlier a new deal with Washington, as opposed to this is an older deal. So there's that I think we should talk about, of how it's different. The other thing that jumped out at me, Ralph, though, is, really jumped out at me. At the beginning of all this stuff with Damon Williams Jr., the Washington quarterback, was the Big Ten was going to rally to get behind Washington's back. And I remember thinking, well, how's that going to work if this is in fact LSU is behind it? It's not like the Big Ten has jurisdiction over it. Here, again, if it is in fact Miami, which we think it is ACC school against an ACC school. There's a weird subplot here of like Manny Diaz just getting his head dunked in the toilet again by, his old school and by the new head coach there, Mario Cristobal. And that's like, okay, if you're Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, how do you get involved in this? Do you get involved in this?
I don't think you can, because as much as you are the head of the league, you answer to the schools, right? So I'm not really sure if there's much that the commissioner can really do. There's also, again, the question that we had talked about of he announces he's going into the portal. But from Duke's standpoint, what we've heard is that they might not enter his name in the portal. So then it becomes a matter of, well,
is it the Xavier Lucas story now?
Is it the Xavier Lucas story? And is the portal real, right? Like, because you can't not allow a kid to unenroll in your school and enroll in another school. Like, ultimately the portal is a construct, right? So there's that element of it too. I also think that as of right now, in trying to again do a little reporting on this, I think everybody is at a little bit of an arm's length because the only person who said anything publicly is Darian Mensah. Obviously, Miami, and that's been a lot of speculation, can't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's for today. So talking to some Miami sources, there were some numbers that came that, again, it's the internet and people flow out.
Right.
At one point, somebody had said, "Oh, it was going to be $10 million for Miami," which sounded preposterous. Given Darian Mensah is a good quarterback. Yeah. Darian Mensah is not like what Michael Vick was at Virginia Tech.
Right.
I mean, he
might not be what Cam Ward was.
No, I'm pretty sure I'll be honest. I'm pretty sure he's not what Cam Ward was. Cam Ward was first pick in the draft guy. Right. After that, like Darian Mensah had good stats. They won the ACC. It was a bad ACC.
Other than Miami, which Duke did not play.
Right.
But yeah, Darian Mensah is a very good player.
Yeah,
he's a little turnover prone, and he's a very good player. And I think he would be an upgrade for Miami. But as you said, I know you talked to a bunch of Miami folks today.
Some of the Miami people feel like the guy they have who's the backup now, Emory Williams, they like him a lot.
And Mario Cristobal, I don't know if you were there for that, but I did see it on my timeline. Again, I wasn't there, but he was asked about what's going on with the future quarterback succession plan. Again, he can't talk about Darian Mensah right now. I mean, it goes back to tampering, right? How do you deal with tampering? I think anybody that you've seen in the last, because we talked about with Damon Williams that, maybe it was LSU, but how do you try to regulate tampering when it's so easy for
a middleman to be involved.
A middleman or two to get to an agent and say, hey, if your kid goes in the portal, we're
you don't have to get to an agent. You can get to a parent, right?
Oh, a parent or a high school coach or a trainer. Yeah.
Yeah. So the big number was $10 million. From talking to some Miami sources, they did not think that was close to accurate, that it was way more than what could be in play here if it's in fact that.
We've heard some numbers at the top of the market. I think the most reliable number we've heard is Brendan Sorsby in that 5 million range. Yeah. And then when I was doing some asking around on Trinidad Chambliss, the number 6.5 million came up. And again, as this always happens, you hear from one source, hey, I heard Trinidad might be in line to make 6.5 to 7 from Ole Miss. And then you go to another source and they'll tell you, oh, no, that's way too much.
And the thing you got to keep in mind with this, and I feel like we've been talking about this since the Jaden Rashada days, right, which feel like forever ago, it's 3 years ago, was the people who are most inclined to be talking numbers, behind the scenes are the agents. The agents are jumping in, they're collecting a big commission, and really what they're trying to do is set the market, right? And so I think where things kind of seem like they got off the rails a little bit with the Mensah situation, Ralph, was Miami has Sam Levitt on a visit, and Sam Levitt, things seem to be going okay. It doesn't seem like he's bullish on LSU at that point. And it gets out that Miami had offered Ty Simpson $6.5 million,
right,
which is much more than what Levitt was in play for Miami. And all of a sudden he's like, well, I forget that.
Yeah.
Even though I want to go to a program that I feel like is ready to win right now, I'm going to go to LSU that's basically replacing its whole roster.
Yeah.
And so I think the money piece of this is so kind of murky with everything. I think it creates more chaos in this because you talk to coaches and you talk to people involved in the process and they're like, we would just like some level of transparency like there is in the NFL free agency market, and there just is not.
So I also had an explanation today from a source who's at another school, not involved in any of this, who was talking to me about like some of the inflation in some of these prices, and without like getting too in the weeds of the math of this. Before revenue sharing kicked in this year, a lot of schools front loaded the contracts, right? Because they were trying to get the third party money in.
Like USC was doing that in a big way to get the number one class and get some momentum going.
Right. They did it with their signing class, because before the regulations kicked in from the House settlement being approved, regulating NIL third party deals and rev share cap, they wanted to get some money into the system. But what it also allowed, the front loading allowed some schools to do is hold back some rev share money this year so they could apply it forward for next year. So now I think what somebody described to me it was happening is you have some schools with a little bit of a surplus.
Texas was one of those schools.
Yeah, I think it's Texas, and I think Miami might have a little bit of a surplus too, and that's why you can say, well, it's not really use it or lose it because you can still apply it forward. But hey, if we've got this money hanging around, like maybe it's worth going to 6 million or 7 million. The Simpson thing is also interesting because it goes like this. As soon as a number is out there, and Ty Simpson himself mentioned 6.5 million, then others are going to jump on that number. As you said, trying to set the market. Yeah. So I don't think it was a coincidence when I talked to people about what Trinidad Chambliss might be in line for. That was the number that came up because it was already floating in the ecosystem. And I'm not saying people are lying. Sometimes it's just a matter of like how you do the math, right? There are guarantees in this contract, and there's like you get to lease a car. Well, that's another $100,000. Like, and that counts. Like one person is counting that, and another person is saying, no, that doesn't really count towards the money in your pocket.
Yeah, and what the school is doing may be different than what somebody else. If you have aggressive, I go back to this Chase Griffin, the backup third string quarterback at UCLA, was making a fortune, but not from UCLA because he was very aggressive and very savvy of how he marketed and got a lot of money for that.
That's another interesting point too, right? Because somebody was telling me like, think like you never know, like you can have some from third parties that may have to go through NIL Go and some that may come from more like corporate sponsors. And maybe they don't have to go through an NIL Go, or you're more confident that they will go through. And then you have maybe a collective involved, and then you also have rev share. So it's the equivalent of like, you sit down to do your taxes and you just have a bag of receipts. Like, where's all this money coming from?
Like Caleb Williams, when he was at USC, was making a lot of money from like United or Airlines, I think. Yeah. And had some big corporations, as did, I think, Bryce Young when he was at Alabama. Trinidad Chambliss had that commercial that was airing a lot from T-Mobile, was it? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, T-Mobile. Yeah. And no, it was a Verizon ad or an AT&T. It was an AT&T ad. Cell phone. Yeah, about, and he was playing off of the you might switch, you might transfer, and he was talking about transferring to AT&T.
And that's not Ole Miss money. That's big business money.
Right. So it also sometimes depends on how this stuff is counted. Anyway,
one other thing, also just to tag on this, because talking to some people at Media Day today, another big ticket item that has gone in the portal late, and he's was a big recruit out of high school, Jordan Seaton, 5-star offensive tackle from Colorado. Yeah, bailed on CU late. Miami's another one that is in play. I believe Texas is in play too. From everything I had heard in the last 24 hours, they were far apart in money, it seemed like. But I know people think this guy is a projected first-round talent. Yeah. And
at a position that's really hard to find in the portal.
And it's a position, by the way, that Miami is losing. CeCe Mauanoa is Dane Brugler projected him, I think, certainly a top 10 pick, maybe even higher than that. And Markel Bell is the left tackle. So I think they would be they certainly are in the market for a replacement on a position that Mario Cristobal holds very dear and very important.
Yeah, and Texas is also looking for a little offensive line help after they had some issues last year. One of their players, though, I don't know, like Nick Brooks played a bunch last year, and he ended up jumping to Alabama. The other thing I would say is I would be on the lookout for not just Darian Mensah. He's going to be the most high-profile one. But moves that were made very late in the portal cycle, I am going to be interested to see what gets talked about in terms of tampering. I think like guys who all of a sudden in the last few days jump in the portal, if there's going to be something done on tampering and some legitimate accusations made that maybe the NCAA, yes, that's still a thing, the NCAA will be forced to do some investigation, I would say it would happen to me talking to people, it would be some of these guys who've gone in late. I think it's pretty obvious if you're in there late, most likely it was somebody sending signals. And I think that I also would be interested to find out how many other kids might be in a similar situation to Mensah, but we just don't know about it, which is they had a contract. Or maybe more consistently, a situation like Damon Williams, where they had a contract in the last couple of weeks. They may have signed something, who knows, maybe as far back as December and signed something. And then all of a sudden somebody got in their ear and said, hey, we can make this work. Again, like we're living in a world where we have contracts but we're just not really sure how enforceable they are. And even whether schools really want to like go out of the way to enforce them. I think from some schools' standpoint, it's like, you know what? I can live with losing the player, but I really like some of that money back. Like I like that other school that
you want it to be punitive.
Yeah, it would be fine if you want to steal my left tackle, but could you like European soccer, like, hey, kick $250,000, $500,000 back here. I don't know if we're going to get there. I don't know if anybody's got the appetite to fight those fights, but I also would keep an eye on that space a little bit in terms of guys who jumped in the portal late and whether there are some complaints about who made that happen.
I want to ask you something that struck me this morning. Miami went first to media day, then Indiana did, and that was, I don't want to say that was definitely not hanging over media day. I think by and large, it was that the game is still, especially down here. It's, the fact that, Miami is playing in the national title game is still a big deal locally. And I think you're going to have a lot of people, certainly from Indiana, descend on this city over the next, 24 hours too. But so for people to understand, like, all the players are brought to media day and all the coaches. Who was not there today was any of Miami's personnel department. They still have recruits they're dealing with, and I don't think Mario Cristobal needs them to be asked questions about what they're doing, especially
today.
I wondered about this, where is this at all a distraction to the game? Nobody's talking about anything with the portal with Indiana. Like, they signed their class and everything. The only way I think this could be a distraction is if Carson Beck gets hurt. And then all of a sudden, Emory Williams is in the game now. And it's like, again, I was trying to game this out and think, is there any part of this where it affects not preparation, but just affects some kind of mindset where there's a little bit of distraction of what's going on with this? I
don't know if it ends up being a distraction as much as it does become an interesting subplot. And even, for folks like us, as we're writing and trying to piece through the story of the game, however the game plays out on Monday. Right. If Emory Williams comes in, even if Carson Beck has a great game, and will probably be some mention from somebody writing the game about, the way Miami has gone into the portal, and who knows who might be next. Maybe they have their next guy lined up. So I don't think so. It's definitely an interesting subplot. I don't know if it moves. Like, what's the difference between subplot and distraction, right? My guess is it's probably more of a subplot issue than a distraction.
And by the way, no truth to the rumor that the ACC network has been running a lot of highlights of Cam Ward. So Ralph,
let's take a break.
Okay,
let's take a quick break here. And then we're going to come back
and find out why you are doing all these pivoting. It's like you're like a figure skater.
I've got some opinions on the national championship game is what I want to say. I didn't have a chance to get to them early in the week.
Okay, and we're back in Ralph's lovely room here. Ralph, I got to ask you this. So Stu claims he got your prediction.
No, that is true. I want to back up. Like, Stu did not make that up.
Okay, good on that. But then I'm reading a file that we did. Our bosses at The Athletic had us all list our predictions for the national title game and reasons why. And I'm looking at this thing and I see Ralph Russo, and I'm like, God damn it, Stu, you are sneaky. Because Ralph, after telling Stu supposedly that you were finally back on the Indiana bandwagon, albeit in the back.
Barely hanging on.
You then go online on our site and you are now picking Miami to win. I'll be honest. I picked some games at Fox that counter what I would have done early in the week on The Athletic. So I can see how that's done, but this is the national title game.
Yeah.
And is it just like one more chance to shove a sharp stick in Kurt Cignetti's eye? What's you pies on?
Yeah. So I fell off the bit, right? I was committed to the bit of being the anti-Indiana guy. And earlier in the week, the guys asked me for my pick. I don't want to make too many excuses, but I was busy and I was just like, I think Indiana's probably going to win the game because they've been playing so well, blah, blah, blah. So I quickly shot a text.
Did Stu bully you into this?
No, this is better for Stu because now he actually has a chance to catch up because we'll be picking the same thing. So after further review, and then, I had a chance to think about it for a little while. And I sat down. I even made fun of myself within the piece saying like, the good thing about being multimedia and multi-platform is you can just say anything anywhere you want. I decided I do think Miami has a pretty good chance here. Their offensive and defensive lines are so good and so physical. And I wonder if they can... I keep going back to the way the Indiana-Ohio State game played out. And, Indiana clearly was the better team and won the game, but that was a close game. And at times in the second half, especially, Ohio State managed to run the ball on Indiana better probably than anybody else did all year, other than, as you keep bringing up Old Dominion and their quarterback who's now at Wisconsin. So gave it a little thought and decided, you know what? I've been on this thing all year. I've also been very pro Miami all year, or most of the year. I shouldn't go into the season thinking they were going to be quite this good, but I kind of warmed up to them quickly. So yeah, I changed my pick. And because I am a student of history, I found myself thinking like, well, what would be the coolest way Miami can win this game? And the coolest way Miami can win this game was if they won their sixth championship the way they won their first championship. So, which was also, this is a little reminiscent of me. That was the game that really made me a college football fan. Like I'm like 12 years old watching that, 13, right? Because it was the 1984. It was the 84 Orange Bowl, right? So I'm 13 years old and I was really into that Nebraska team. And I'm watching that game and I was kind of crushed but I was also like totally, I had already liked college football, but at that point I was enamored. So I picked Miami 31-30.
And I get it now.
Yeah,
so that was the score.
I picked Miami 31-30.
For our audience who is not as old as me and Ralph,
right?
That Nebraska team. So I referenced this. Chris Felica and I had a podcast the other day, and I brought this up where I remember being middle school age, I think, maybe, upper elementary school, I guess, but whatever. And we were visiting South Florida and it was Miami Herald did a different matchup of that game, Miami against Nebraska. Nebraska was legit being talked about as the greatest team of all time, right?
Yeah.
So he had Turner Gill, obviously ended up being a coach and a CFL quarterback, but it was a terrific option quarterback. You had Mike Rozier, the Heisman Trophy winner, and you had Irving Fryer, who was, back in the day, like a freak, wideout running back hybrid guy.
Who ended up being a first overall draft pick for the Patriots.
And you had Dean Steinkooler, who was this, powerhouse offensive All-American.
Dave Remington.
And so you had this, best ever offensive line. And Miami had a quarterback whose number was 20, and he was a redshirt freshman. He didn't run very well, and he looked kind of like a dark-haired Raggedy Ann doll, right? And they had a lot of people didn't know. And if I think people knew that Miami team, they would be like, oh, they're not really Cinderella because they got they got brass knuckles on, because that was kind of the Miami behind the scenes. But they ended up winning the game, and obviously Howard Schnellenberger launched everything from there. I'm not saying anyone looks at Indiana. I know Stu had brought this up the other day on the podcast about but they are a clear favorite in this game.
That was the other similarity. Listen, I definitely am leaning into narrative here, right? Like this Indiana team is not viewed at like that Nebraska team really was mythical. I mean, especially at a time when you didn't see all the games on TV. So even though you didn't see them every week, what you would see is like 77-7, 67-0. Like they were just annihilating teams every week. So again, there was this mythical quality to them. that they came in as such a favorite. It was supposed to be a little bit like a coronation. Now, again, we're not there with Indiana yet, though we're pushing it. I think our total
last two
count,
games,
I think our total count in the Athletic was something like 20-4 in terms of picking for
I talked to a dozen coaches, every single one of them who played one team or the other. A couple of them played both. Every one of them picked Indiana. Now, not all of them thought it was going to be a blowout. They all did. There was an interesting thing that came up. I talked to a couple of the Miami players and coaches about this, and one in particular. And I said, as I was kind of walking through like different scenarios, how this could play out, something dawned on me. And it became more and more apparent the more I looked at it, which is Mario Cristobal's teams are much better as an underdog with a chip on their shoulder than they are as a favorite. If you even look in the playoff, pretty good underdog against A&M.
Yeah.
No penalties, and big underdog against A&M or against Ohio State, 4 penalties.
Yeah.
Right. Then they go as the favorite. They drop in a bunch of interceptions against Ole Miss and have 10 penalties. Yeah. You look back when they lost to SMU at SMU, it was 12 penalties. When they lost to Louisville, 9. Yeah. When Cristobal was at Oregon, he had a bunch of big wins at Ohio State without Kayvon Thibodeau.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Big underdog.
Yeah. Joe Moore had great game.
Great game. Yeah. Anthony Brown was the quarterback. You had they upset USC. They upset Utah in the Pac-12 title game. They upset a top 10 Washington team. They were all underdogs in those, and those were big wins. Yeah. And so when I brought this up to one of Cristobal's assistants,
DNA a little bit,
it was like he's totally like nobody has a bigger chip on his shoulder than Mario Cristobal. It just fits. Now, whether they can play a really clean game and not get sucked into penalties, that's another story.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is I do wonder if we are almost now a little drunk on what we've seen out of Indiana the last 2 games, right? They just killed Alabama. Alabama looked like a team that was ready to tap out.
Or didn't belong in the playoff.
Or didn't belong in the playoff. But nonetheless, I mean, that's still a top 50. Even if they didn't belong in the playoff, they're still probably a top 15
with a bunch of NFL guys on the team. Yeah. They're really talented quarterbacks.
And to just roll through them. And they did something similar to Oregon, though obviously the turnover situation with Oregon sort of inflated that game. Not to take anything away from IU. They dominated that. And they dominated that game. They dominated that game, but maybe the final score might have been a little more bloated. And I just wonder if we didn't have those final scores, like at the beginning of the playoff, if I put Indiana and Miami on a neutral field, what would the line have been? It might have been a little closer. It might have been less than 7, as opposed to now where it's, I think, about at least as of about 8.5. I mean, maybe it's moved by the time this comes out. So I again, like the pivot to me was A, a little more time to think about it. B, sticking with where I've been all season, which is always doubting Indiana, and also trying to like do a little hat tip to the history of where the Miami program is. And again, going back to that game, which made me a college football fan.
For the podcast, it would have been a little better if you said, listen, I told him this is what it is. And then all of a sudden he created his own narrative. That's him. And just put it all on.
Again, I could have done that, but now the thing is, we are going head to head again. So I've literally flung the door open for Stu to take the easy way to at least tie us, if not go ahead of us in the picks contest, because I was all ready to just take Indiana and basically kneel on the ball, right? And take the lead here. But no, speaking of not kneeling, I'm going with Mario and the Hurricanes to pick the upset. So let's stick on the game for just a couple of seconds here. Give us an X factor player here. Obviously, we're not doing, Stu's not here, so we're not doing quarterbacks. Yeah. We're not doing Malachi Tony. All right, go a little deeper here on who's going to be the player who helps decides this game.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and this is in the spirit of Malachi Tony, but I just think he is the key guy is Mark Fletcher. If Mark Fletcher runs the ball like he did. Miami's like 72nd or something in the country rushing for the season, but they've run all over, a couple of really good defenses. And one is the borderline great defense in Ohio State.
And they had a weird season with their running game because Fletcher was hurt a big chunk of it. They were kind of trying to figure out which is their best running back, which is their most healthy running back. I think you talked to Shannon Dawson, like, how they wanted to run the ball became a thing. You know, like they're very focused on running between the tackles, and that almost got a little bit like stale. And they had to do some things schematically as the season went on that opened some things up in the middle.
The Fletcher thing too, and I'm not, if it happens, it's like a pretty amazing story. You know, like grew up in a huge Miami family of fans. His dad passed away like a year ago, Mark Fletcher Sr. His mom drives to every game.
Oh yeah, that's a great story. She's great on she's she's on TV a lot. Like she
big
drives
fun personality,
to every game.
but she drives to every game. And some of these games, including the one they just played, was a long way
she drove
away.
To the Fiesta Bowl.
Drove to the Fiesta Bowl,
which is awesome.
I mean, I once drove to the Fiesta Bowl, but it was from Los Angeles. It wasn't from Miami, and it was because of like a Southwest Air like issue. That's you know, it's like crazy.
So we're very happy for her.
That
nothing else that she has a short drive across town.
Walk to
Hard Rock.
I want to call it Pro Player Stadium. That's dated.
That's so funny because I always want to call it Joe Robbie. You're right, like some pro player.
All right, so who do you got?
So you took my Indiana to win and then picked a player on Miami. I'll do the opposite. I'll try to find somebody on Indiana here. My mind goes to, and I've talked a lot about him in sort of glowing terms, is Charlie Becker, the very tall, 6'4" receiver who not burst onto the scene, but broke out.
He did when
the second half of the season.
Hurt,
second half of the season. And it created this, and again, this is hyperbolic, and we keep bringing up this LSU situation, like, are they as good as LSU? And they're not, just in pure talent. But if you remember, LSU had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson playing on the same team, which is incredible. They also had Terrace Marshall, now who is, I think, still knocking around. He was like
NFL. He was a high recruit coming in. He was 6'3", 215, and he would be a number one in a lot of teams.
Yeah, and he was drafted and again, I think he is still knocking.
He's in the top 75.
Yeah, I think he's still knocking around the league, and I think the emergence of Becker with Surratt and Cooper have now created like a three-headed monster that makes, and which could also be a reason why they've been so good in the playoff, right? Like they've sort of kicked it into another gear because now you have a three-headed monster in the playoff, and Becker's a sophomore.
And Miami's missing Xavier Lucas, a big corner, for the first half of the game.
For at least the first half. One of their other corners has been banged up a little bit too.
I mean, Tamari Brown's been out for
he's going to play.
Yeah, but he's been they haven't had him for a while.
No, that's a good point. But is Damari going to play? I don't know. I don't
know if he's going to play.
And Frederic has been also.
OJ Frederic is a good player.
Yeah, he's a good player who's also had some
obviously
issues.
Their headliners, Keontae Scott, is a cover guy and a big play guy. But
so yeah, I'll go with Charlie Becker just because he's played so well. Again, he burst onto the scene with the Penn State game and has just been a monster down the stretch. And I just do think that like that three-headed monster situation, or that three-pronged attack for their receivers, has made a big difference in the playoff. Before we get out of here, Bruce, the College Football Hall of Fame announced its latest class. We wanted to do some shout outs on that. I don't have the list in front of me. I'll go very quickly because I know you have one that's a little more near and dear to you. What was cool to me is just, this is like the great defensive line class. Ndamukong Suh and Aaron Donald.
It doesn't get any better than that.
In our lifetime, that might be the two best defensive tackles in college we've ever seen.
Like Ndamukong Suh, statistically, and statistics don't usually do justice to defensive linemen. I mean, the best season of anybody who's ever played college football. And
maybe the best singular game I've ever seen a defensive player play. Right? The Texas game, the Big 12 game against the Big 12 title game against Texas, where Texas managed to win with the 1 second on the clock and whatnot. But I mean, Suh was just killing people. I thought he was going to kill Colt McCoy. I literally thought, in fact, my very quick story about that. And I have to clean up the language a little bit.
You don't. It's a podcast.
Well, some of it's a little tough. So somebody on Texas, I was talking to after that game was played, and they said that this was the story that was conveyed to them by, I think it was one of the Texas players who was on the field before they were getting ready for the kick, and how they were huddling for the kick. They were sort of like a muddle huddle for the kick. And Suh walked toward their huddle and said, "I'm going to effing kill all of you guys and block this mother kick."
That's like Jefferson at Fast Times,
Right.
like kind of stuff.
And because he had been essentially doing that throughout the game, I think he was just really trying to intimidate everybody. And it didn't work. They got the kickoff. In that case, they got the kickoff and ended up being the game-winning field goal. But he was so imposing during that game that he just like he walked towards the huddle and screamed at everybody. And this Texas person was like, yeah, a couple of our guys were like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do now? I think we made him angry. Anyway, so those are the two guys that highlight the class for me. But you have, again, one person going in, especially who you get to sit next to a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I have two colleagues who went in. Mark Ingram, obviously a Heisman Trophy winner at Alabama, has been a blast to be around. Just a fun, big bundle of good energy. And then, but Chris Peterson, was a remarkable coach at Boise State and then at Washington, and, get to watch football with him every Saturday. And sometimes I wonder, I was like, does he really need to make this flight down here all the time just to do this? But he's the smartest football guy I know. Like, there's nobody you'd rather watch football games with. And his perspective is a real perspective. And a lot of times I feel like football coaches especially head coaches, get so into the weeds and into their thing. And he, reads a ton of books, and he's always thinking about development and being better and all these things. And he's become such a resource for a lot of coaches. And honestly, he's been a really good resource for a lot of us who work with him. I was really happy to see that happen. It's funny because his last year as a quarterback at UC Davis was 1986. And, it's funny hearing him talk about like his playing career, because he was a coach's kid who, I guess, now I know him as, pretty skinny, slim fit guy, but he was like a 360-pound bench guy, and it was all into the weight room for a long time or whatever. So he was a really good quarterback. The linebacker coach was a young linebacker coach, and that was Gary Patterson, who also went into the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Got inducted in. So congrats to him. One quick question for you, Ralph, and this isn't a quick question. The greatest college football player I've ever seen was on the ballot. That's Cam Newton. How does Cam Newton not get in? And I don't want to disparage anybody or Jordan Lynch or anybody else who got in on the first time, but how does Cam Newton not get in?
So, without going too far afield here, it is weird. It's not quite the same with the first ballot stuff like you see in the traditional halls of fame, like professional sports. There are so many players that go in. So a lot of times what they end up doing is, and I don't know this for sure, I haven't talked to anybody. So I'm from following the Hall of Fame, I'll give what I think probably happens. They often don't like to put players from the same schools in multiple, like in consecutive classes. And they do like to spread out some of the better players. So that first ballot thing isn't as emphasized with the College Football Hall of Fame. However, I'm kind of with you. Like, hey, this is Cam Newton. Like, I know that maybe Auburn had somebody last year, and maybe you wanted to make sure you had room for other guys who have been on the ballot a little longer. And there ends up being the whole College Football Hall of Fame process ends up being a bit of a puzzle being put together, because you're not just taking into account who deserves to get in, because there are so many players who deserve to get in. Right. There's a backlog who deserves to get in. You're also taking into account timing and where players are from, and trying to get some geographic balance and things along those lines. That's not a great reason to keep Cam Newton out. And maybe you should have made sure to get Cam Newton in, because I'm with you. My last word on it will be, that's the best singular one season of college football I've ever seen played. I will always go with, people will say, well, Barry Sanders, I was a little young for Barry Sanders. And again, his games weren't on TV every week, so I didn't see it. We saw Cam Newton every single week, and he dominated that season, 2010, like no player I've ever seen before.
Basically carried a 6-6 caliber team.
Nobody else on that team played for
Nick Fairley. It was him and Nick Fairley. Yeah. And not to say there were bad players around him, but that team was like pretty mediocre before he got there, and really mediocre right after he got there. Different. It was Cam.
All right, so thanks for joining us. It was great to get to see and hang out with Bruce for a couple of days now, and to actually do this show live. We missed Stu. We will be back in a couple of days after the national championship game. We'll review that, and we'll review the season next week as well. But thanks for joining the Audible presented by Trader Joe's. And we'll come back at you after we've crowned a national champion.